the Triathlon Show 367. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Erin Carson. Erin is a strength coach working with a number of the world's best short and long course triathletes, and in the recent Ironman 7.3 World Championships she had her athletes sweep the women's podium. So that was Taylor Knibb, Paula Findlay and Emma Pallant-Browne, who all work with Erin for their strength work. In this interview we discuss what the strength training of these athletes looks like, and we also discuss strength training from the perspective of age group triathletes. Long-time listeners may already know Erin from when she was first on That Triathlon Show back in episode 137, but that being 230 something episodes ago, I think it's we were well due for a repeat on the show, and I really enjoyed talking to Erin and hearing more about her expertise in strength training. Before we get into the interview, I want to give a quick reminder about the That Triathlon Show survey that I'm currently running. You can find the link in the show notes in the episode description on your podcast app or directly on scientifictriathlon.com. And the goal of this survey is to help me improve the podcast and take it in the direction that the listeners desire. So it really is a chance for you to directly influence where the podcast will be going in the future, and I would love to get the feedback from you and from as many listeners as possible. Now, finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Roka. Roka produce exceptional quality triathlon wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, performance sunglasses, and prescription eyeglasses and sunglasses. If you want to go faster in the water, look to Roka's range of wetsuits. From the entry level to the top of the line wetsuits, all of them come with arms up technology and exceptional quality and comfort in the water. Roka's tri-suits work perfectly together with the wetsuits, as they too come with arms like technology to really maximize your shoulder mobility for the swim, and on the bike and run they are optimized for aerodynamics and comfort. Roka's range of sunglasses and prescription glasses is also packed with innovation with patented technologies such as the Geeko anti-slip technology. They are ultralight and have excellent optical properties. Visit roka.com/TTS for 20% off your order. And thank you to Zen8. The Zen8 indoor swim trainer is a unique dryland swim trainer that allows you to improve your technique, power and swim training consistency. It is a perfect tool to complement your pool and open water swimming, as it allows you to do very specific power and technique work, including working on your catch and your core activation, and it makes it easier to stay consistent even when you can't go to the pool. You can even use it to do activation work before a pool or open water swim, or to do swim, bike, brick workouts more easily. You can try the Zen8 risk-free for up to 30 days, and if you don't love it, just send it back. And you can get a special That Triathlon Show bundle that includes the swim bench and a bunch of Zen8 training plans and on-demand workouts on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Now, without any further ado, here's my interview with Erin Carson. Welcome back to That Triathlon Show, Erin. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me.
It's been quite a while since we talked. I actually don't remember exactly. Was it in 2020 perhaps that we last spoke? But we have lots of new listeners, so let's start with an introduction. Tell us more about who you are.
My name is Erin Carson. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist. We can call that a strength coach. I'm kind of skewing a little bit towards health and human performance specialist, because the name strength coach might not be all encompassing of the things that are important to me when it comes to athlete performance and human performance. So I live in Boulder, Colorado. I'm one of the owners of a wonderful health club and training facility called Rally Sport. And I've been working with some of the top triathletes and runners and cyclists in the world for about 10 years.
And you're also a triathlete yourself. Are you still racing, or?
I am. I have found I've been to 2 world championships in 70.3. I've been to both Mooloolaba and Nice. Nice was my last world championship. And then I broke my ankle this summer and really focused on cycling and just digging in on that kind of stuff. But you learn a lot when you get injured. So I'm a former basketball player, international basketball player, played for the Canadian national team, Division I basketball at the University of Colorado. And but now I am just all in on performance. And for my future for 2023, my goal really is to help my athletes win world championships, qualify for Olympic Games, I'm going all in on them. So I'm going to stay fit and healthy, but I'm not going to race in 2023. We got too much work to do.
All right. Well, let's dig into that then. Some of the athletes you work with include Taylor Knibb, Paula Findlay, and Emma Pallant-Browne, and I'm going to have questions about them because they all have placed on the podium in 73 worlds, so that's exciting. Are there any other athletes that the listeners will know that you're also working with that would be interesting to hear?
I think where it all began for me was with Mirinda Carfrae and Timothy O'Donnell. So they have taught me a lot. I have taught them a lot. We've been together for a decade, and I'm so proud of their careers, and absent of having children and falling off of sidewalks and having heart attacks. We have been really physically, orthopedically healthy for 10 years. And that really added a lot of validation to the approach that I was taking with endurance athletes. And I think it's an important part of my story, because when people like Timothy and Rinny are working with somebody, young athletes might have, it adds a little bit of street credibility to the work that we do together. So those are two of my favorites, and I'm still working with them. I hope to work with them for probably the rest of their careers and hopefully the rest of their lives. I also work with Rudy Von Berg. Rudy and I have been working together for about 2 years, just trying to keep him healthy and just keep elevating his game. He's struggled a little bit with some illness. Morgan Pearson, who we're hoping to get to Paris in 2024, a top short course athlete here in the United States. If I'm forgetting anybody, I apologize, but those are the ones that are coming at the top of my head right now. So they keep me pretty busy.
Yeah, of course. So since you mentioned they're keeping Rinny and Tim O'Donnell healthy for 10 years, if you summarize it, give an overview of your approach, how to do that, your elevator pitch, so to say, about your training philosophy when it comes to the strength and conditioning part, what is it?
I think the most important thing with Tim and Rinny, it begins with the athlete understanding and knowing their bodies and knowing when those bodies need time to recover and rest. My approach with them has always been to start from the inside out. So we've started with we do a lot of breath work. We do a lot of mobility and movement. We use foundation training to add tension back into a very mobile system. And then we add strength on top of that. I think there's a little bit of a misconception around strength training that the more you lift and the more time you spend becoming a stronger athlete, that might equate to speed. And I can say that for the most part, we might need, in some cases, to add some strength to build speed. But for the most part, my goal with these athletes is to keep them incredibly healthy and balanced and rely on their coaches to build the speed and get them stronger, so that there's no niggles that get in the way of their progression. And so with Tim and Rinny, sometimes they'll come into the gym and I'll have one idea of what we should do. And they'll say, I don't think that's what we should do. And I don't fight them on that. I listen and respect that. And we communicate really well around those decisions. So a lot of times, if the sport coach is pushing them hard, Julie Dibbins is a wonderful coach. I know she pushes her athletes hard and appropriately hard. And so I dance with that a little bit. I dance with sport coaches. So I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So
we will. Yeah. Let's dig into some details here around Taylor, Paula, and Emma specifically. When and how did you start working with them?
Each one of them have some Boulder roots. So they come to Boulder. They know that Tim and Rinny are working with me. They're curious about that. Starting with Paula. Paula was probably the first connection that I worked with Paula when she was here working with Siri Lindley. Siri's squad was working out of Rally Sport. Paula came to us from Canada, not healthy, quite injured. And we started working together really consistently. And before you know it, she was healthy. We had a process to bring her into a place of balance and health and strength. And we were able to get her racing again. Then she left Siri and went on. I think she's been working with Paolo for quite a while now, and
Yeah.
he's her coach. And the irony is, I've really never talked to Paolo, because Paula is a mature, older athlete. She knows her body really well. I'm able to communicate with Paula very clearly. And my goal, although I have never met him, is to just help Paolo look like the amazing coach that he is and who he is, because he has such a good track record. So if I can keep Paula Findlay healthy, and getting stronger, she will only shine brighter. So Paula was first for me in her early 20s. So that was almost a decade ago as well. And now we're back much more consistently. There was a time when we kind of fell apart a little bit when she was in San Diego and then had moved to Bend. And now we're back together this will be our third consistent year of getting her healthy and keeping her that way. So we'll talk. I know we can talk about some specific strategies with Paula, but
yeah,
that's my story with.
What about Taylor?
Taylor had been coming to Boulder working with Neil Henderson, a wonderful coach from here in Boulder. That's how I met Taylor. Neil handed Taylor off to me to do some foundation training, some strength work, when she was just starting at Cornell. And so just a late teenager, and we started together when she was working towards the under 23 and she was a junior, and moving forward from there. Taylor is now with Ian O'Brien. I think she's in incredibly good hands, as shown by her performances in the last couple of years. So I've been working with Taylor remotely as she was at Cornell. Her coaches there took a lot of the lead. And then when she graduated, I took more of the full-time role as her strength coach and development from that. And as a matter of fact, as we at this day today is 2 days before the grand final in Abu Dhabi. So I saw her this morning via Zoom to make sure she traveled well and made sure her body is responding well to her across the globe. So it's kind of fun with technology, what it's taught us. So I see Taylor in person 2 or 3 times a week here in Boulder.
Yeah. And finally, Emma.
I actually met Emma's husband, Jared, before I met Emma. So I've been working with Jared for quite a few years. He was pursuing professional triathlon himself, and I was working with Jared as he would come to Boulder every year. And then Jared and Emma fell in love, and there's a beautiful story. And he introduced me to Emma. Emma's a great story, and I love being part of her world. She lives in South Africa. She is a runner who turned into a very, very world-class triathlete. But her mindset, I probably have the furthest tether with Emma. Emma knows her body really, really well. And I am full-on consultant for her when it comes to heavier loading strategies. But Emma really embraces a lot of the mobility work that I do, and the activation on a lower level. When she is in Boulder, we work together, and I do everything I can do to get her under load. But let's be honest, she's doing wonderful as a performance. Her performances are amazing. So I don't want to take anything away from her, but I would like her to lift more weights, and she knows it. So I think as the years go forward, we'll do what we can to just make sure she continues to rank well in the PTOs, and that she makes sure that her training is good. But she also has an amazing coach in Tim Don. Tim has spent a lot of time at Boulder, so Tim knows me really well, and I know Tim really well. But his coaching with Emma has been right on point, and so yeah, they're doing great work, and I compliment it from afar as much as Emma needs and wants. But we definitely connect weekly. So
yeah, and that leads me to then when you have Emma in South Africa most of the time, and you have Paula is in Oregon, I believe, most of the time, and Taylor might come in and see you 2-3 times a week, but that's not going to be the case for Paula and Emma. So how do you work with them? Is it more program based, or is it program plus a call every week, or do you actually have in-person Zoom sessions where you take them through the movements? What does that look like?
We'll do in-person Zoom once a week. I'll do a little bit less with Emma, but I'm with Paula and Eric, her partner. I train Eric as well. So we'll come together on Zoom and train in person via Zoom, which thank God for the pandemic. I didn't even know what Zoom was before that. So we can do that. We do that weekly with Paula, and then I will schedule her second or third and third, depending on the phase that we're in, but via 2 apps that I developed. So I have a long video format application that it's actually me coaching the session, and athletes can go through that session using long video format. Or I have a short video format, which is just snippets and demonstrations of each exercise. It's kind of a list that has some video to it. And both of those are unique to EC Fit and have given me the opportunity to work with athletes all over the world. So Zoom is one layer that's very personal. The long video format gives a lot of coaching and information. And the third format is one, once we get comfortable, the short video format would be my customized program for people, because I can switch it really quickly for people, pull an exercise, add an exercise or a movement with ease. So 3 different ways of doing it.
But even having worked with them for a long time, you still find it valuable to once per week have a Zoom session where you can actually watch them perform the movements and to give feedback. Is that the main or one of the main reasons that you do that?
There is no greater communication than seeing someone in person. So I just started with a new athlete, Imogene Simmons. She has been in Geneva. I trained her in Geneva on the Zoom, and she's like, okay, now I'm going to be somewhere else. And so I've seen her in 3 different global locations in the last 3 weeks. And we are just getting started together. And so that will be very interesting because I want to see her for the first few weeks. I don't feel comfortable giving her movements without me seeing how she's responding to them, even the facial expression, because triathletes are very good athletes for the most part. And so they can do almost anything I ask them to do, but it might not be comfortable. So quality of movement and how they move, they can show me things in their face when they're like, whoa, what is that? Like they'll look to the side and they'll look like wince a little bit if it's uncomfortable, but they'll do it. You know, they're very, for the most part, most of the people I work with are very coachable. So if I say stand on one foot and reach forward with your left arm and rotate, they'll do it. But if I can see their face, I can see if they do it easily or if they're challenged by it. So tissue is an interesting animal, but there's nothing better than being in person because I can walk around and see 360 degrees how that athlete accepts the load or accepts the challenge. And so person's the best, but it's not always possible.
Yeah, no, Zoom does a decent job at least. So that's great. Let's dive into the programming that Taylor and Paula and Emma had for the entire year, basically leading into the podium performances in St. George. So if you give an overview of the year, if you had some kind of periodization there, and then we can dive a bit deeper into the last couple of months, maybe before the race. You can start in whichever end you want with that question.
Let's start. You know, each of the athletes are very unique. So when you're not with somebody, you can take that shotgun approach where it's like, this is a general phase of training. This is going to help 90% of triathletes. And I definitely have that kind of protocol. All of my pros use a very general protocol of movement and movement quality. They understand hip internal rotation. They understand ankle mobility. They understand a concept of anchoring. There are some big global concepts that we all meet in the middle. If any one of those concepts goes awry, we have to get it back before we start adding in complexity into the programming. So those anchors for us is ankle mobility, hip mobility, thoracic spine mobility. Each one of those athletes had different physical challenges throughout the year, except Emma. Emma was quite healthy all year. So Emma pretty much stuck to the strength program that she does actually with Peak Team. And they have a great, I'll give them a shout out because on YouTube, Emma does a live program every Wednesday morning on YouTube under Peak Team. And then she'll do my Monday mobility on YouTube under EC Fit Strength. So she does a lot of mobility. She'll do lighter loads and keep that going. And she was quite healthy all year. Paula had a little bit of a niggle, and I'll let them kind of talk about what the niggle was, but we had to work around and with different strategies to unload and help bring balance into Paula's body. Same thing happened with Taylor. I think I can just delve off into the stratosphere of short course racing, because short course racing presents a whole different challenge with athletes' bodies. And this year in particular with Super League and with some of the sprint distance triathletes, someone like Taylor who has to go sprinting into a short, what do they call that? It's a sprint. It's a sprint distance triathlon versus an Olympic distance triathlon versus a PTO distance versus a 70.3. That is huge range. And I think that's very difficult on a body. And so I think I know that everybody knows that Taylor was out a little bit early in the season. And I think it was because just trying to bring that speed up to that short course, super short course, took its toll on her body. She wasn't quite physically ready for it. So we dealt with that and just kept building strength around that little niggle that she had to deal with. And I think that lack of racing and the ability to focus on her health and her full body balance served her and has served her so well in the fall. And I think that same thing happened with Paula. You know, the same thing we saw with Lucy Charles, who coming off of Kona, she's not my athlete, but all the work that she was doing at the Red Bull Center and that she shared on her YouTube channel was beautiful, that she was so generous to share that with the world, that like, stop deadlifting until you can walk on your toes and work through your ankles. And there's little muscles that matter. And so her reach and influence, hopefully people took note of that, because she also had a very, very good Kona. And I would give her all due respect to come back 3 weeks later and race 70.3 worlds. So I think each one of those really high, the whole podium at the women's race in St. George, I think was dealing with different challenges throughout the year. And it's a long year for those guys. So keeping them healthy and balanced is the most important thing. So that each one of them had very specific things that we worked on in the summer to get them ready for the fall. Yeah.
Obviously, when an athlete is healthy and training and racing as normal, one of the objectives of the conditioning program, strength and conditioning, is to keep them healthy. But you never, like, it can be difficult, I assume, to really know, okay, what is the part that is going to break down, for example, when you introduce more speed in preparation for a Super League race or whatever it might be. Like you can guess, but you can't really know, and then it might happen. So when it happens, Taylor hasn't spoken really about the injury, so we don't have to go into what the injury was. I'm not going to ask you, but do you then try to like really build up whatever tissue it is that took the damage a bit, like more like focus really specifically on that, or is it more of you maintain a more holistic perspective throughout that rehabilitation process?
I would say very comfortably that in my experience, most of the time where there's a breakdown of tissue, that isn't the problem. It's further up the kinetic chain. So where there's potentially a knee problem, I wouldn't blame the knee. I would usually blame the ankle or the foot or the hip. I might even blame the thoracic spine and the lack of movement and rotation through the spine. So when I first start working with an athlete, a high performance athlete, or even an age grouper, I want to see how their thoracic spine, their hips, and their ankles are moving. You know, there's so much talk about glute activation and the power of the glute that very few people have the appropriate hip function and pelvic rotation and function to really take on most of the speed that they're able to produce. And that's when, either low back pain starts happening or hip pain starts happening. We saw it this weekend with Sam Long in Ironman Arizona. Those are some predictable patterns that the sport does produce. Tight hip flexors, lack of ankle mobility, lack of thoracic spine mobility. You can mobilize them till the cows come home, and if you don't strengthen them, it won't stay. So it's really important to find get the body moving well, and then we will seek to unload the tissue that was probably overloaded. And it was probably overloaded because of compensation from a pretty high performing athlete.
So do you see a trend in the athletes are more often like the culprit, the root cause is a mobility issue in one of the joints, or strength of a certain tissue upstream, or is it equally distributed between the two?
Yes. Yes. The answer is yes. So yeah, because I'm not a yoga person and I'm not, some people do really, really well with yoga. So I'll do respect to that. But yoga is passive mobility. It's ranges of motion that might not be useful. I use foundation training for mobility because it is active mobility. So the nervous system is upregulated into the movement, and we create challenges around a joint to make we would maybe use the words agonist and antagonist muscle groups to come together. So like the adductors, the inner thigh muscle, they should work really well and be very good friends with the abductors, the glute med on the outside of the hip. And that's a big one that I can usually make a pretty good change very quickly. Adductors are very typically tight. And if the adductor group is tight on the bicycle, they will actually start acting like a hip flexor. So there's a big muscle in the adductor group called the adductor magnus. And magnus has anterior fibers and posterior fibers. And the anterior fibers do one thing and the posterior fibers do another. And when you lay in arrow position for a long time, that anterior fibers of magnus start acting like a hip flexor, but he's not a hip flexor. He's supposed to stabilize the hip so that we can have nice hip extension when running. Another good friend of mine, Lawrence Van Langen. Lawrence is a wonderful body worker and thinker around movement. And he does videos of all of the guys and females coming out in the first mile of Kona. And he looks at hip extension. The only thing he was looking at when they start running that first mile, who has hip extension and who doesn't. And then we have to look back and see, why don't they have hip extension? And how could we potentially help that? So if you watch Timothy O'Donnell run out of T2 running out on the out and back on Elite before they head out onto the Queen K, we know T.O. is going to have a good day if he has hip extension in that first mile. That means we set him up really well on the bike. And I say we because he has a team. It's not just me. Same thing with Rinny. Nothing makes me feel better than to see that athlete get off the bike, have hip extension, and just rip it out of T2. And I saw that with Taylor in St. George. I was blown away. And I was actually working as a volunteer out on the course in St. George. And I saw Paula. I did not see, Emma was not in the group at the time. So I saw Paula, Flora, and Lucy Charles. So you've got Paula, the gold medal winner from Tokyo, and the world champion from last year running in together. And I looked at the people and they were just heading out on an out and back. And Paula had hip extension and was moving through her thoracic spine. The other two weren't. And I was like, when they come back from that out and back, Paula will have a gap. And everybody was like, why? And I was like, because she's moving so much better than everybody else. And sure enough, when she came back, she had put that gap into those two. And that was huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I completely agree. I don't know. I can't say that it was that I saw that she had hip extension, but I just saw those three running, and I had a feeling that that was Paula's day. It was hers to lose. She just looked better intuitively to me than the other two. Just also facial expressions, I think. But she definitely, you could tell that she had she had confidence in her body and that she would be able to have a good run from the start. And that's, of course, credit to all the work that you and the rest of her team had done. A couple of other questions about the strength and conditioning of these athletes. You mentioned 3 sessions per week. Is that more or less what they normally would do?
I would comfortably say they're coming to the gym 3 times a week, but I would say the sessions are 2.5. So there's going to be 2 full sessions. And for me, that's 30 to 45 minutes. That's not an hour. I don't know where in the history of strength and conditioning we decided everyone needed to do an hour, but my kids don't because they train so much. So that third session is usually negotiable. It's always, there's mobility every day. There's tissue release every day. There are times when the athlete is just fatigued. I mean, they have great coaches, and those coaches, their job is to bring out the best in those athletes. And that means walking a line of fatigue and performance and the ability of those kids to get the work done. So I am sometimes the biggest advocate for recovery and rest, almost to a fault, because their natural mindset is to work. They want to work. They want to outwork. It's like there used to be a saying that I used when I was playing basketball. It's like, look around you and, I will outwork every one of you and I will beat you on that day when we meet, and now I think we know more. I think we now know, okay, you're going to go work. I'm going to go meditate and rest and get in my Normatex. And I will probably beat you because you didn't jump in your Normatex. So I think that the training load is such that it's important that the kids have a very, very good intuition and understanding of when they need rest. And so for me, 2 sessions is somewhat non-negotiable, but how those sessions and how hard those sessions are is totally negotiable. So we've got to get the work done because these kids have dreams. These athletes have dreams, and we need them to realize those dreams and find their best. So some days we got to push, and knowing your athlete is probably really important too. Because some days we should listen to them and some days we shouldn't.
Yeah. So what would then, when they're in the thick of the racing season, during summer, during preparation for big races, but we're assuming that they're not too tired, nothing crazy is going on. There's not a race on that particular weekend. What would a typical 45-minute session look like?
Typical 45-minute session will always start with some movement, mobility that is geared towards undoing some of the tightness that naturally comes from swim, bike, run. So tight pecs, tight hips, tight ankles. So we'll move and we'll look for a high quality of movement. We want that really softness in their movement. We want flow. If I don't see that, we'll take more time for that mobility. We'll take more time for tissue care. Some athletes enjoy foam rolling, some don't. Some athletes like the massage gun, some don't. So I'm not partial to anything. We just kind of give each athlete the opportunity to experience each modality that we would use for tissue care, and then hope that they really resonate with one. So whenever I come in, I don't direct the first 5 or 6 minutes of the session. I just kind of see what the athlete chooses, because it's interesting. Some of them are so set in their ways that they'll choose the same thing every time, even if they don't have the intuition yet to say, I don't need to do that. Like, I'm looking to see, does the athlete come in and always go, oh, I'm going to foam roll my lower leg. Now I'm going to foam roll my hips. Now I'm going to foam roll my upper back. That athlete is very regimented, and I might guide that athlete a little bit more and try and throw some curveballs at them and say, don't do that today. Do this first. And it freaks them out to do something else first. I've had a couple of those in the past. Don't have any of those right now. And usually an athlete will show me exactly where they need more motion, because if they come in and stick that foam roller in their armpit and lay sideways on it, I would say that their thoracic spine is feeling tight. They're seeking more motion there. And they didn't say, I think I'm not moving well. They just intuitively went there. If they sit on the foam roller and put their right foot on their left knee and just start moving through their hips, I know that they've been working their butt off and their hips need to maybe be open a little bit more. So I will really watch that first 5 or 10 minutes to see where I think the session needs to go in addition to what I've already got planned. But the most important thing is mobility first. Then we'll do some light loading to enhance mobility and bring up that motor unit recruitment and just make sure everybody's in the game. And as I describe movement and loading.
What does light loading mean here in this case?
I might use a 10-pound weight that has no representation of percentage of 1 rep max. It has no reason other than it's 10 pounds. And when you reach that across to your knee, it's going to give you a little bit more inertia to open up some more tissue. I typically don't look at muscle. I look at movement. I train the fascial system and the connective tissue. And I see the muscles within these little bundles of fascia. So instead of training the quads, I'm training the whole lower body. And instead of training the hamstrings, I'm training the whole back line of the body. So a lot of that learning from me came from a book called Anatomy Trains, written by a gentleman named Thomas Myers. And in Boulder, we have the Structural Integration Institute in Rolfing. And when people get stuck in movement, the fascial system typically and the nervous system shuts that movement down. And those people are so beautifully trained to enhance movement by working with the fascial system. And we've been very fortunate to have time to learn from Thomas Myers and understand movement and how we can strengthen movement and build trust with the nervous system so that the body can actually move better. So there's lots of layers to how I approach performance and strength and conditioning.
But that part with the light loading, it's dynamic movements.
Yep.
Designed to just facilitate better
enhance movement.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then what's the next part?
And then we're going to get under load with the muscles that might have become inhibited because of tightness. So if there's tightness, like that's why everybody loves to talk about glute function. So I definitely want upper back function, scapular stabilization, glute function, ankle mobility. If the foot and ankle are not moving well, the glutes will not fire well. So we need to make sure the foot and ankle are moving well. We use a lot of balance boards. I think some of your listeners might have heard of a MOBO board, MOBO board. One of our friends, Jay Deshari, invented that. Jay wrote a book called Anatomy for Runners. We have a nice community that supports each other. And the MOBO board is a big part of the work that we do, which enhances the loading of the big toe and how that plays to make sure an athlete is loading their big toe. It's really important. And that just clicks on up the chain to make sure that your body is stable and strong.
Yeah. And is that the end of the session, or is there another part after that?
Well, then we're going to get into strength, and that's the irony of it all, right? So you're a strength coach, but that's the last thing you get to. And so,
but that previous part, you still want to do it under load, so you still use some weights, at least depending on what the issues are. Okay.
100%. Yep. So the heavier loading strategies definitely enhance the hormonal profile of the athletes. And as the athletes get a little bit older and get into their 30s and maybe even into their 40s, that heavier loading strategy becomes part of the hormonal profile. And I think, as we know, endurance athletes sometimes might struggle with a hormonal profile that skews a little bit to lower testosterone. And that it challenges the athlete's ability to recover. It might challenge their mood. It might challenge a lot of other things. So we look at using heavy load and building technique and skill under heavier loads to ensure that our athletes can use some physical challenges to help all the systems of the body, mental, emotional health as well.
What would that part of the session look like? Do you have 2, 3, 4 exercises, and you do how many sets of each and reps? So each athlete will resonate towards 2 or 3 heavy lifts that we want those athletes to get very good at. The hex bar deadlift is very accessible to a lot of people.
It's very low risk. I'm very risk averse. So anytime you put an athlete under load, you're putting them at risk. So you better make sure that they're in really good physical preparation for those lifts. So most of my athletes are very good at the hex bar deadlift, and we can use that as one of their heavy lift. Some of them are more comfortable with a goblet front squat. So they're going to put the dumbbell or the kettlebell on the front side of their body. I only back squat one athlete, and that's because she grew up back squatting and she does it very, very well. And I have back squatted actually Jeannie Seymour as well, but Rinny is a great back squatter. She's the only athlete that I back squat. But the spinal I'm not going to say kyphosis, but spinal flexion that we experience on the bicycle. So that little bit of rounded spine. And the tightness on the front side of the body sometimes will make it very difficult for an endurance athlete to get under a back squat. And I find that puts that risk profile is just too high for me. So I am a front squatter through and through. We can do an Olympic bar on the front side of the body, but there are some athletes that are very uncomfortable in that position. So we're going to deadlift, we're going to front squat, we're going to do a lot of high pull down exercises, either a lat pull down or something similar. A single arm shoulder press is something that we get under, but we very rarely will bilaterally press overhead, just because why risk a shoulder? That doesn't really help them as much. So single arm presses allow you to rotate and elevate one shoulder or the rib cage if you want. And bent over rows. Heavy bent over rows, single leg, double leg, supported, unsupported. We do a lot of rowing. So each athlete has their 3 or 4 lifts that when we want to get them under load, it's low neural demand because they've become so good at it. So the neural challenge is low. I just say, we're going to row today, double arm, single arm, whatever it is. They're not freaked out by it. They don't have to use much energy to get in there and do it. So
when you select the different exercises, it might even be when you start working with the athlete, is it all about what exercises that they are fairly proficient at or comfortable with, or do you also have in mind any weaknesses that they might have in terms of the sports? Let's say somebody with a weaker swim might need something like a bent over row or something like that, whereas somebody who has a strong swim might focus more on lower body exercises.
It depends when I come to the athletes based on their season. So it's in the off season, that's the best opportunity to make those changes. And if you look at what's happening in triathlon in general, the biggest opportunity to help an athlete get stronger will be on the bicycle. And that means building lower body strength, core stability, core function, and upper body strength as well. So because they have to get off the bike and run. So you cannot ever get away with that from that thought process when it comes to triathlon. With cycling, you can. I've worked with some tour riders and whatnot. The upper body for a tour rider is more about being able to stay down an arrow as long as possible for the most part. They can produce force into the pedals, but they don't have to get off the bike and run. And so when it comes to the off season, if there's an opportunity to build strength in the lower body and relative strength in the upper body, and the coach, the cycling or swim, bike, run coach takes it on themselves to really up the ask to become a different cyclist in the off season, we can work together on building that. But I have to stay out of the way a little bit too, because if there's a really technically strong, scientifically based coach that I'm working with, then they're going to want to take the lead on progressive overload. And this is an important distinction for what I do. In the off season, I get to do a little bit of progressive overload, but for 10 months of the year, for the most part, the coaches are doing the progressive overload, and I'm keeping the athlete healthy and strong and balanced. And the way we keep them strong is by keeping them balanced.
Yeah.
So that's important. But I do have some young athletes that I know if they want to be competitive, if they want to be in the PTO rankings in the top 50 or top 40, they have to build lower body strength to be able to produce the kind of watts on the bike that are going to make them world class.
Yeah. So when you have those 10 months when you're not really doing progressive overload, what would the intensity or the weights of these weighted exercises look like? If you can talk about it on an RPE scale or from like repetitions from maximum, or however you want to describe it.
On my professional athletes, it'll be very individualized depending on where they are in their career. You know, as good as Taylor Knibb is on the bicycle, she's not one of my stronger athletes. You know, so we're going to take a long-term approach. She's only 24 years old, turns 25 in 2023. We're going to just, you know, she's shining like bright like a star right now in the body she's in. And the potential for her is huge so I'm keeping her healthy as I can keep her. You know, Paula being around 30 years old there, as they get older into that decade into their 30s, the heavier weights will become more important throughout the entire year. So not just in the off season, but also during those little breaks and even on not the down weeks, because most coaches will go build back or build back. They have their art that they do. It doesn't mean because it's a back week, I'm going to all of a sudden jump in there and go, oh yeah, let's load the crap out of the athlete. We can't do that. So we have to let the hard days should be hard. The easy days should be easy. So with the pros, it's pretty targeted to who they are and what they need. With age groupers, we want to just take this long-term approach because most of us are in the sport to be healthy and strong. And we like to see our placements within our age groups. That's what's beautiful about being an age grouper is like, am I in the top 20? Am I in the top 30? Am I in the top 50? And am I moving up as I get older? Those we want to take a long-term approach. And we would cycle probably 3 different periodized phases of strength. So we want to look at how the year outlines, choose our A races, and then build the program for the year, around that. So an age grouper should go heavy maybe 3 times a year, and we would build that out from their A races.
How would you build? First of all, 3 times a year. That's not 3 workouts a year. That's 3 blocks of training per year, right?
Yes, exactly.
And how would can you explain how they would fall in relation to the races?
I think usually most athletes, and this is very, we're taking a shotgun approach here. I think most athletes would be really well served 6 to 8 weeks out from a main performance objective to be comfortably under heavier loads. And then as we get closer to that race, that we would go more into a moderate phase. I use 5 phases, and they definitely fall into very traditional strength and conditioning nomenclature, but I've kind of adopted this thought process. So we've got it's all based on airline travel. So we've got our pre-flight workouts, which are all based on movement prep, glute activation, opening the body up. Pre-flight sessions are typically less than 20 minutes. And then once you get on the plane launches. So that first phase where we use lighter loads, we do mobility, and we just want to keep the body balanced. I call that phase launch. The next phase where we do get under load and we do traditional strength training and some mobility is called climb. And so we're trying to get up to cruising altitude. So we've got pre-flight, we've got launch, and we've got climb. And then there's cruising. And cruising, I don't do a lot of cruising, which is more of that high intensity interval training and a lot of, maybe CrossFit-ish kind of stuff. I have learned a lot from CrossFit and I've stolen from it in high performance, but I don't think it's a good combination to be a triathlete and a CrossFit athlete. I think that might be a little risky for me. And then the 5th category is called the lounge. And in the lounge is where you have to rest and recovery. And I provide a lot of leadership on active recovery strategies. So an athlete will call me and they'll say, I need this. And I'll say, well, just do a launch workout. And that's categorized the way I described it. And then now I might say, do a launch workout on Tuesday, do a climb workout on Thursday, and then let's do a recovery session on Saturday. And so we just kind of can communicate in a really easy way. And each one of I've got a series of launch workouts and series of climb workouts that are very accessible for people around the world, in long video format and short video format. So I kind of learned that when people were like, what are Tim and Rinny doing? And I was like, oh God. And I would write out this big Microsoft Word document, and it took me forever to do it. I was like, there's got to be a better way. And that's when the apps got developed. So
yeah. That's actually why I started the podcast, because I was starting to write some blogs and I just couldn't finish an article because it just took me forever. So then I realized that talking is probably faster than than writing.
Yeah, and fun.
Yes, exactly. You mentioned that they do some mobility basically daily. Was that right? Like, is that
yes.
10 minutes or so, or how long would those sessions be?
Yeah, it's like a little check-in. And so I call them measuring sticks. It's like, how does that feel? So like when I go for a run, if my shoe's undone and I'm about 3 miles into the run, I do this little check-in. How hard is it for me to get down and tie my shoe? And it's like, whoa, that feels a little tight. So it's a measuring stick. And I'm like, wow, I need to work on this. So when an athlete, like a wide squat, feet externally rotated just ever so slightly, and we might just use 10 fingertips to the ground and just do a full body squat. Was that easy? Was that hard? And if it was hard, then let's foam roll a little bit, or let's do a little bit more squatting. And then we do a big overhead reach with 2 arms. And if that feels tight and I can't straighten my elbows and I can't elevate my chest and expand my rib cage, my thoracic spine might be a little tight. Here are some strategies to get that working well again. So we do a lot of front foot elevated hip openers, where you put your foot up on either a countertop or a chair or something like that, just to see how the hips, how tight the hips feel, and opening the hip on the front side, the capsule on the front side. A lot of little check-ins that might guide you to tell you what you need that day. So not everybody needs the same thing. And if you go through these little checklists and it took 3 minutes and everything felt good, then go to work, go run, So learning to know your body and be able to anticipate a niggle or a tightness will, in the long term, really serve you well. So those check-ins, that's why I do Monday Mobility, because everybody shows up on YouTube and they can just go through these series of movements that I provide each week. And I'm like, whoa, that's a little tight. Pay attention to it. Don't have to do anything drastic, but just don't let it get out of hand. You know what I mean? Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And any nutrition or fueling considerations for the strength sessions?
The biggest thing is most of the time I'm seeing the athletes after they've done the work, swim, bike, run. So I love it when they walk in and they're nibbling on something. And I encourage that. I'm like, make sure that it's with a banana or a bar, or they've got something in a bottle. That's usually what I will see. Most of the people it's not my specialty to be a nutrition and hydration expert. Boy, Pete, there's so many smart people doing that now. So any age grouper has access to some of the smartest people in the world for those things. So it should be something. But I also can say where I would get involved a little bit is a lot of people think they have lower leg issues. They think they have tight calves and tight soleus, and they might, but a lot of times that's dehydration, and they cannot solve that with just water. So a little bit of electrolyte is usually at the top of my list. I live in a very dry climate here in Colorado. So most of us don't drink water unless we're drinking water, but we're trying to put electrolyte into the water a lot. And the lower leg, being the furthest from the circulatory system, is usually a first point of dehydrated tissue. And so there may be some tightness, which might show up as tightness and lack of mobility, but it's dehydrated tissue. So we'll be like, okay, sip throughout the session, keep moving the tissue, move the tissue. And that's when tissue is most able to accept nutrition. You don't want it to get sticky, and you don't want it to get not glidey. Massage therapists can tell sticky tissue. This is dehydrated tissue. I won't pretend to think that I could tell that apart, but I can see when there's not usually a lack of mobility there. So let's drink some more fluid and move, and that will help hydrate the tissue. So dehydrated tissue is tissue that is vulnerable. We want to make sure that our athletes are not vulnerable.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And do you use any kind of technology in the sessions, or even after the sessions, or related to, or before, related to recovery? There are all sorts of things now, like neuromuscular readiness and things like that. But of course, there's also velocity-based training, and and is that something that you use at all?
No, I probably am a little bit more into the woo-woo of how it feels. There's so much technology for swim, bike, run. There's form goggles now. You can tell if you're going faster, slower, what your stroke rate is. There's so much technology with cycling. Same thing with running. We have power with running now. When it comes to my stuff and the way I approach it, I think what I will see in the future, maybe with some of my short course kids, as I start to elevate in having short course kids, is sprint timing, and maybe a little bit of force plate when it comes to both jumping and the ability to produce force. But I'm not, I want to feel the human being within the athlete, because endurance athletes work so hard at the sport. The strength program should complement that. It shouldn't beat the athlete up, and they should like it. Morgan Pearson, it will forever be a great story for me. Morgan came to me with a little bit of a hamstring issue. He's been injured most of the year. He will race this weekend in Abu Dhabi, and we're just hoping for a really good day for him. But he came in, he goes, he's like, I don't like coming to the gym. And after the first 3 weeks, he kept coming and he kept coming. And I'm like, are you liking this yet? And he's like, okay, yes, I like it. I'm like, okay, because the consistency, you have to fall in love with strength training a little bit to be not only one of the best in the world now. I think that's the way you're going to stay healthy, or that's the way you're going to keep up with the Norwegians. I mean, we haven't even talked about what's happening to our sport because of Norway. Blame Norway.
Even though, those guys, enough, they do no strength training.
They said but that's so funny, because they take in Daniela Reef and Brett Sutton. He says the same thing, but yet you see Daniela every now and then. You can catch a video of her using a band. Well, I would argue that they do strength training. They do something. And they also just did the Rich Roll podcast, and they admitted that they were the ones that lasted when they were young. A lot of kids got injured trying to train with Gustav and Gustav and Christian. So I don't think that people are not going to strength train, but I think that's part of the conversation. It's like, well, those guys don't, so why should I? Well, those are the two that got left out of the whole herd. Those are the two very special athletes. The same thing with Daniela Reef. I know just enough about how hard Brett Sutton trains people. She could handle the training, and not only physically, but mentally and emotionally, she could handle the training, and her body didn't break down, but most bodies will. So I think that, I think you have to like it. You have to enjoy the process. It has to be accessible. It can't, the work in the gym cannot take away from the training. It can't, you put an athlete on a trainer who's trying to do threshold efforts and give them a sore quad, they're not going to want to come back to you. So my goal is that I'm very quietly behind the scenes, providing them with a platform that they can safely work really, really hard at their sport and not feel compromised from the gym. So that's the dance and that's the art.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I 100% agree that just because something works for somebody doesn't mean that it works for everybody else. And there's all sorts of survivorship biases and other stuff that we could talk about in that regard. But well, everybody is different, and there might be different paths that work for the same person or for different people. But you just have to try to figure out what works the best for you. And that brings us to a section of more general questions, I guess, moving away a bit from the training of Taylor, Paula, and Emma. So I want to ask about form when doing lifts and other exercises for that matter. I think we all understand that it's important, but how does one go about becoming better, more proficient at these movements?
To me, the most important movement anyone can achieve is a good hip hinge. You should not, if you cannot hinge at your hips, your spine is at risk. As soon as you put your spine at risk, you're in big trouble. So hip hinging and your ability to push your hips back and load your glutes and have the posterior chain and the backside of the body and the back line work cohesively is really, really important. I've had athletes who do not want to work with me because I will not put them under load until they can control their spine angle and hip hinge really well. So, and some athletes learn that in 2 sessions. They're fine. And some athletes, just that movement pattern is hard for them. So it might take months to get them under big load. They will still deadlift. They will still front squat. But they won't do it with really heavy weight until they can control that hip hinge, until they can show the timing that's needed. And I think I do a pretty good job of selling the long-term benefit, but also the long-term commitment that it might be. I mean, Tim O'Donnell did not go under load for 10 months. Rinny went under load in 2 because, not only are their bodies so different, but T.O.'s got these big, long arms, huge wingspan. He's a swimmer. He didn't play basketball like she did. So watching Tim play basketball is not pretty. It's just not. But watching Rinny play basketball and move around is really compact and brilliant. So 10 months and 2 months. And that's knowing your overall experience in the weight room is important, and feeling safe. And feeling patient. So long-term approach, be patient. I do believe, I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist in the United States. CSCS is the credential of distinction for strength lifting weights. So I'm very well trained and we're very well versed in appropriate form for lifting. When it comes to performance and high performance athletes, the understanding that putting them under more load won't accelerate their way up the PTO rankings. It just won't. It might actually do the exact opposite. So I'm going to always preach a long-term approach. Be patient. Trust the process. We've heard probably many coaches say that. Trust the process. Love the journey.
Is it something that you can learn on your own by, filming yourself, comparing to YouTube videos, or do you really want to go and see a strength and conditioning specialist and get some help with that if you haven't mastered the hip hinge?
Most of our audience are athletes. I think there is a lot of good information available out there online on YouTube. Follow me at EC Fit Strength. I work daily on hip hinging through mobility and through breath work and through counterbalanced movements that activate and load the hips. If you look at what do they call it? The effective minimal dosage.
Yep.
We really do want to get as much work as possible with as little work as possible. So if we could have great performance outcomes with very little work, wouldn't we choose that? Shouldn't we choose that? And so it's that's why, I would challenge people. Are you getting better? Yes. Okay. Just sit with it. You're getting better. Like, you don't need to go start heavy deadlifting and thinking you're going to get better faster. Tissue takes time to adapt. the cardiovascular system takes time to adapt. People, inpatient people usually pay a price in time away from the sport because they're dealing with an injury.
And can you give any examples of exercises that you would really not recommend doing? For example, you mentioned there that a lot of your athletes they do hex bar deadlifts rather than straight bar deadlifts. So that's something that I was thinking about as well, that you might recommend. Is there anything else that general sweeping recommendations for exercises to avoid or equipment to avoid?
I think that the hex bar is more accessible than a straight bar because of where you can put your hands. So the mechanical loading is actually just a little bit less risky. But if you can do a straight bar deadlift and you're comfortable pushing into the ground with a bar, I love that exercise. Moving load for speed is something that's very CrossFit-esque. Doing snatches and cleans with under time constraints. I find that to be incredibly risky, and I would not do that. I think that those are great exercises, but they do not serve endurance sports well. Other than that, everything in dosages and everything with experience. And if it's working for you, it's probably not a bad choice, but you have to be recognizing when it's working against you as well. So I just don't like moving things fast unless there's really a high level of proficiency and you can really justify why it's moving fast.
Yeah. How would you incorporate strength training into the time budget that most age groupers have? Or, well, that's varying a lot, so of course. So does it depend? Do you scale it based on athletes that have 15 hours versus 10 hours versus 5 hours to train?
I really believe in 20 to 40 minutes of strength work 2 to 2.5 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week. And an athlete that cannot make that kind of time for my programming, if they're doing great and there's a lot of people doing really good work without doing any strength training or any mobility work. I would just say that there's a time limit to that. Eventually 1 year it's going to change for that person. So the commitment needs to become routine, and it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be accessible. It cannot be put upon. The people that have experienced the most success with my programs have actually had conversations with their coaches where they have brought back some of the volume. I think we know more now. I mean, your show is so good about sharing such good information. We don't need as much volume as we thought we did. So pulling some of that time from maybe a 3.5 hour ride and make it a 3:10 and finish up with a strength session, a mobility and strength session, that athlete would probably feel better than the 3:30, So leading into races and building and developing the aerobic system and the anaerobic system and all of the systems, I think people overtrain a little bit much, and there should be time allocated. I think coaches need to I don't feel like we're there yet. It's one of those questions that I put out, and I would put out them now. We need a dialogue between people who do what I do and swim, bike, run coaches to really align maybe a little bit and trust each other a little bit more. I think people from my genre of coaching maybe need to keep getting smarter and share our ideas. That's why I was so happy that Lucy shared on the platform that she has, that there's more to this,
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. And I think also when it comes to fitting it into busy schedules, there's a responsibility on everybody involved, from the athlete to the triathlon coach to the strength coach, to come up with solutions that work good enough, even if it's not perfect, like doing it at home, not going to the gym, like figuring out what is the minimal effective equipment set that you need to have at home to be able to do the work that you need to do and to stay injury free. It might not be perfect, it might not be everything you had in a gym, but it can be good enough. And then if you then end up doing it consistently, then that's a lot better than aiming to go to the gym but not having time, so you miss half of your sessions.
Exactly. And I think the relationship between the strength coaches and the sport coaches will get stronger as strength coaches start to realize you don't get to, this is not the glory. The glory is to the sport coach and to the athlete. That's where the training needs to lie. It doesn't matter.
I think any coach, no matter what it is, or any support person, has to realize that they are a very small part of whatever the athlete is doing. Like the athlete is doing the work and performing on race day. And I'm going to get back to that, actually, the home-based gym. But before that, are there any things that you would do differently or adjust depending on age and sex of the athlete?
Yeah, definitely. The hormonal profile. So we can go just from the athletes in their 20s don't need as much. Athletes in their 30s, we need to make sure that there is an amazing skill set in place to get under heavy load, but they don't need as much heavy load. We're only preparing them for the next decade. So going into the 40s, athletes should be very comfortable deadlifting, front squatting, pulling, and rowing, and maybe a single arm shoulder press. In your 40s, you have to be able to get under load, both males and females. Once you get over 50, you want to accept the fact that if you want to be a really healthy 80-year-old, you better have strength training as a really big part of your program in your life, and you better find some joy in it. And if you're not having fun, then find a different program, because there's some strength coaches that love to just stress you out and put you in compromising, challenging situations every single session. And then there's some of us that are just like, okay, 3 times a year, I'm going to put you in those situations, So I think that in our 50s, we have to now we're in love with it. And then on our 60s and 70s, we got to keep it going, because that's so important. Dr. Peter Attia, one of just a brilliant longevity doc, he talks about the marginal decade. And even with Taylor, she's 24, she's really living in the moment. I, as one of her teammates, somebody on her team, I'm already thinking about what's Taylor going to be like when she's 30? Like, how can I help prepare her for that next decade? But Dr. Attia talks about the marginal decade. And for those of us that are in our 50s, we really want to be thinking about our final decade of life. And for me, that's kind of falling between 90 and 100. I'm probably going to check out somewhere in there. And I want those years to be great. And so everything that I'm choosing to do right now is about those years being great. And yeah, I want to be great in my next race, and I want to get on a podium, but I also don't want to do things that'll take that, put me under risk. Like if I blow a disc out of my back or tear a labrum in my hip or blow a shoulder out from doing CrossFit, like that's going to affect my marginal decade. So we could definitely dig into menopause and females and their need for heavy load, but it's exactly the same as men as they go into challenging times with testosterone later in life as well. So I do believe everyone needs to know the lifts that they want to get under heavy load. They need to have high skill, good core strength, a great hip hinge, and a great state of mind that they actually think it's fun.
If you can give 3 exercises that the listeners, especially those that are in, let's say, 40 years and above categories, and 3 exercises that would be pretty achievable for most people to learn with some practice, maybe with some feedback, what would you say are the loaded exercises that they should put in their repertoire?
The first one, and this comes before a hex bar deadlift, is a goblet squat, a front squat, because that has a high core activation ask on the body. So your ability to hold weight right on your sternum is really important. And you can do that from a parallel stance or a split stance. So the goblet squat is my go-to starting point. The second one would be probably the hex bar or the straight bar deadlift. I love deadlifting. And then the third one is probably going to be a single arm bent over row. So you need to, and that can be supported, that can be on a bench, that can be putting an arm up on the wall, or it can be unsupported, that your body is holding you in space. So those are probably my 3 go-to exercises for heavier loads.
Brilliant. Yeah. And then moving on to the home-based strength training questions that I had. First of all, just a general question on how well do you think that a home-based strength training program, and this is assuming you don't have a fully equipped gym at home, how well can that work to maybe not completely replace, but I guess replace the work you could do in a gym?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of dial-a dumbbells these days. A power block is called. So you can get anywhere from 5-pound dumbbell to a 55-pound dumbbell in one handle.
Yep.
And I have a set of dumbbells called MX30 because mine only go up to 30. Because I do believe that most people should have a relationship with a gym because variability is really important to the body. But if I have a home gym because I don't always have time to go to the gym and I own it. So if I don't get there, like nobody's getting there. But the biggest thing is at home, the dial-a dumbbell, the compact power block is a really great tool because it doesn't take up much space. I do have a hex bar at home and that has been a good investment. And once people have been with me for a couple of years, I do suggest that they get a hex bar and some bumper plates for the house. So Paula and Eric I'm sending them a list. They have kettlebells, dumbbells, they have mini bands, the little small loop bands that are used for activation. They have long bands with handles. And then this being our third year, I think it's time for them to get a hex bar at the house. So when you get off your bike trainer or you get off the treadmill after a hard session, they can incorporate a heavy deadlift. They're both healthy and that will serve them well. So, but it's you don't need to get that right away. I do think a goblet squat at home is terrific. So I also use a tool called a Viper, VIPR, Viper, that stands for Vitality, Performance, and Rejuvenation. And then they stuck the I in there because it makes sense. But viperpro.com or viper.com, people can see what that is. It's a weighted cylinder. And a lot of times on the social media, people will see me and my athletes with a Viper. And that's just a fun tool that doesn't feel like weights, but it is. So we're using load to activate the body in different ways and loaded movement training, we call it. So yeah, I think home dumbbells, mini bands, long bands with handles, a hex bar eventually if you really start using your stuff a lot. And then I have a mobile board, mobileboard.com.
Yeah, no, that's great. I got one of those adjustable kettlebells during the pandemic, and it's
perfect.
Probably the best purchase that I've done in many, many years. I use it all the time, and I didn't. Mine goes up to 40, which is pretty good. I should probably get one that goes up to 55. That could be good for some exercises. I didn't actually know that you could get them because I haven't seen them around too much, but not that I've been looking particularly. But yeah, that's cool to hear that they go as high. Another thing that I got that I really love is a door anchor, and just for attaching all of your bands so you can do various exercises. I think that's been a brilliant addition as well.
I agree.
And what else did I have here? How would you adapt the strength training program if you have an athlete that trains at home exclusively? And let's say in this case, they do have the kettlebells, but they don't have that hex bar. So what are the changes you would make?
Yeah, we just use a lot more single leg challenges. I mean, we're going to get out of bilateral loading quite quickly with most athletes anyway. So unilateral loading, single leg work, whether it's a skater squat, rear foot elevated squat, also known as Bulgarian split squat. We do a lot of single leg work so that we don't need hundreds of pounds of load. So Imogene will be an interesting one because we're just getting started. She's going to do a lot of single leg work. I would imagine that maybe next year this time she'll need to get under bigger load. And if she progresses well in these next few weeks, we'll probably get her into the gym, but she's willing to go to the gym. You know, if you can show, and I think I get asked this a lot, like, how do you get people to engage with a strength training program and how do you get them to stay there? You need to show an athlete change. They need to feel change in their running or in their riding in the first 2 weeks of any program, because once they feel that, they're going to keep coming back. And so then if the ask is kind of inconvenient, I need you to go to a gym, they're going to go because they trust the process. And there is a point where you need to perhaps go to the gym. But some athletes, I mean, Mikhail, that's one of those things that if they're progressing as an athlete and they're one of the best in their podium, they're hitting podiums, then I'd say they're probably strong enough. You know, building more strength in that athlete that is achieving, progressing, and doing well, and they're healthy. We just need to stay out of the way of that body getting better, because that body is doing really well. So that's where the arrogance of strength coaches sometimes, and I think I might just be old enough to have learned, if all those things are in place, stay out of the way. Don't cause a problem where there isn't one. Yeah.
And one final question, that your comment about progressing the work with Imogen to maybe next year. How much do you track? How carefully do you track the loads that athletes lift? Is that something that is important to you and that the athletes keep track of, or where do you sit on that?
I definitely keep track of it, but it's not a driving influence in the training. I keep track of it to see how comfortable they are under load. If I have a question, my biggest question will be to their sport coach. Are you happy with where they are on the bike? And are we happy with how fast they can run? Those are the only questions that really need to be answered. And if the coach says, no, I need her stronger on the bike, then I'm going to start skewing a little bit more into my side of trying to help that athlete become stronger in their lower body and their upper body. As I mentioned earlier, that's not to be ignored with a triathlete. So if the general progression on the bicycle is not coming along at the pace that the coach might like, I have had coaches in the past say, I need this athlete to be stronger so that they can really challenge themselves in these sessions. Then I have to up the ask. And that might mean that the coach needs to back off some of the volume to give me some energy from that athlete to be able to use in the strength training room. And if they have to trust that the volume, there won't be a deficit of aerobic capacity because of what we're doing in the strength training area. There's been just so much research, so much studies on concurrent training. I believe it. I don't think you can build both at the same time, which is why I stay back and let the sport progress as it should until it's not enough. Like if an athlete anymore cannot sit in a position where they cannot make money, or even most of us, age groupers, if we're not progressing, if that's our goal, or if we're in pain, then there needs to be some shifts, So if you're training swim, bike, run, and you're an age grouper and your back hurts all the time, well, we need to back off the swim, bike, run training and give you a better body that can handle the training. More training won't make you faster if you hurt. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think there's a tremendous amount of balance to the whole experience of having a good time in sport.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a brilliant note to end the strength and conditioning discussion, but let's finish with the rapid fire questions. And this is a new set of questions because you already answered the original ones in the previous interview we did. So the first question is, what's your favorite place to train?
My favorite place to train is the Big Island of Hawaii. And for a couple different reasons. I just got to give that because I think Boulder is probably the best place to train, Boulder, Colorado. Because the mountains and the riding are so exquisite, but I live here. So I can mentally and emotionally check out when I'm on the Big Island and just enjoy the warm Hawaiian breezes, and the Queen K riding is great and the ocean to swim in. So for me, that's magic.
And what is a bucket list race or event that you would want to do?
Oh, I thought about this. I would want to do Mooloolaba again. And I think I want to do Nice again. Those were both very different courses, but both world championship experiences that were just amazing experiences in my life. And I prepared all year for both of them. And I think I just want a do-over. Either one of those.
Nice was amazing. I was there. I think that was definitely very worthy of a world championship race. And,
it's brilliant.
And if you could acquire expert level in any skill in the world for yourself in an instant, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to say that in an instant, if I could be Lawrence Van Langen, I would be him in an instant. Lawrence is a doctor of chiropractic who can understand the joint positions and where the body sits in the skeleton. But he is a master of fascial work and the understanding how fascia can influence the skeleton. And I just find him right now to be so brilliant and thoughtful. And so I would want to be able to do that kind of hands-on fascial manipulation that would just open an athlete up so much and give them so much access to their brilliance.
Yeah, right. And finally, where can listeners find you and your work?
I think the best place is to start with my website. It's easyfitstrength.com. That kind of leads you into everything, all the ecosystems of the programs available. I think the one that I'm most proud of that has really been developing over the last couple of years is my premium group. Athletes love Training Peaks or Today's Plan or whatever modality they use for their training calendars. I work in Training Peaks right now, but I'm going to expand a little bit into Final Surge and Today's Plan as well. But the biggest thing is when the strength program is on their Training Peaks, they're more likely to do it. So in my premium plan, I lay out a whole week of training for all of my athletes. And there's 2 live sessions a week. So they're always getting access to the most current kind of training that we're focusing on, mobility. I also have a couple of coaches working with me and doctors working with me to help not only answer questions, but be available for my premium group. So that group is really taking on a personality of really engaged high performance mindset people, CEOs, high performance moms, people who want to run fast marathons, have really started gravitating towards my group. So, and with this podcast, if it's okay with you, I'd love to offer anybody that wants to try premium for 30 days and just have that full experience. They could do that, and we can put a code or a link in your show notes.
We can sort out the details, and I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, so and you can do that anywhere. And even if the live workouts don't work because you live in Poland or somewhere, you can always just register for it and do it whenever it's good for you. So
yeah, sounds brilliant. Thank you so much, Erin. This has been a blast. Really enjoyed it, and as usual, lots of learning from you. So yeah, thank you on behalf of all of the listeners as well.
So excited for the grand final this weekend and bring on the next year. Let's go.
Yeah, it will all be done when the listeners hear this, but we have that to look forward to in a few days.
Okay, good.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com, and you can find all the links for this episode in the episode description on your podcast app and in the show notes. Remember to take the That Triathlon Show listener survey, as I mentioned at the intro of this episode. Also, remember, as Erin said in the episode, she's offering 30 days free trial of her EasyFit On-Demand Premium. So definitely, if you enjoyed Erin's interview here, go and check it out, give it a try, and see if it is for you. We'll of course have Erin's YouTube channel as well, and Instagram and website, and her previous episode on the podcast, which was in number 137. And I have linked to the entire strength training episode archive as well, where you can find all of the episodes I've done related to strength training. Next Monday, we have another repeat guest coming on, which is Dan Bigham. We'll discuss all the details about his world hour record that was later broken by Filippo Ganna, but he was the world hour record holder for a while there. And we'll discuss the training and testing that he did in preparation for it. And of course, with Dan on the podcast, we go deep into a lot of different aerodynamics topics and what's working now from everything that he's seeing with the work that he's doing in that field. And before we finish, I also want to remind you to check out our training camp in Mallorca at the end of March. You can find all the information on scientifictriathlon.com, and if you have questions or want to register, you can email me directly. The training camp on Mallorca will be a fantastic week of training. You'll get the chance to come and train a lot with a bunch of like-minded people, a bunch of coaches, get to interact with athletes and coaches and talk triathlon, talk shop, and build some great fitness ahead of your 2023 season. It is a paradise for cycling, and if you haven't been to Mallorca, it's definitely a bucket list destination that any cyclist and triathlete should go to at least once in their life to experience the cycling there. So why not come and do it with us in March of 2023? Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, and exceptional sunglasses and prescription glasses for everything from day-to-day wear to extreme action sports. Use the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS to get 20% off your entire Roka order. And thank you to Senate. Use the Senate swim trainer to improve your technique, power, stamina, and swim training consistency. You can try the Senate risk-free for up to 30 days and get the special Senate plus TTS bundle, including the swim trainer and a number of Senate training plans and on-demand workouts on senateswimtrainer.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.